Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. So I'll just give the translation of that verse before I start the class. So the translation is, Krishna is a lover of Radha. He displays many amorous pastimes in the groves of Vrindavan. He is a lover of the cowherd maidens of Raj, the holder of the great hill named Govardhan, the beloved son of Mother Yasoda, the delighter of the inhabitants of Raj, and he wanders in the forests along the banks of the river Yamuna. So I'll read from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 6, Uniting Two Worlds. This chapter is called At Home in Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada was teaching his disciples right up until his last days, instructing them in how they should prepare for their own inevitable death. And he was also instructing them in the advanced stage of devotional service, testing them to see whether they were willing to serve, not just as official devotees, but out of spontaneous love, which goes sometimes beyond the rules and regulations. This love was tested, for example, by the disciples' willingness to stay up all hours of the night and constantly attend Srila Prabhupada, assisting him in even his most basic bodily functions. And it was tested as Prabhupada engaged his disciples in the ordeal of deciding whether he should fight to live or pass away peacefully. It was on the basis of such intimacy, for example, that Tamal Krishna, unsure what was best, argued against Srila Prabhupada's request for a certain doctor. He was completely involved in Srila Prabhupada's well-being, and he was always thinking about it and ready to do whatever was required. Ultimately, Prabhupada never changed from being the authority and master of all his disciples, and they knew it. They could offer counter-suggestions as he inspired them to reach across the barriers of ordinary protocol and serve him with love to their heart's content. He even allured them to reprimand him. But when he liked, he would have the final word, emerging again as the absolute authority for his disciples. It was only to serve his will that his disciples lived and acted. Srila Prabhupada said that his disciples' determination and complete surrender and their desire and prayers for him to remain with them, for him to fight and stay, this was all that was still keeping him in the world. Certainly, Prabhupada was not being kept in the world by complan or the ordinary therapeutic effects of massage. In fact, he was so thin that the massages were no longer actual massages, but were more soothing caresses, which could be given only by faithful, surrendered servants. When one day Tamal Krishna asked Prabhupada if he felt he could stay for 5 weeks until the temple opening, he replied, "If you encourage me." Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So it's Canto 1, Chapter 5, Text 10. So I should apologize in advance if I mispronounce any of the Sanskrit. I had meant to take the opportunity to get a devotee to sit down with me and help me with the pronunciation, but due to the busy schedule over the last few days, I didn't take the opportunity. But anyway, I'll have a go. Na Yad Vachas Sitra Padam Hare Yasho. Nayad Vachas Sitra Padam Hare Yasho. Jagat Pavitram Pragrinita Karchit. Jagad Pavitram Pragrinita Karvichit. Tad Vyasasam Tirtham Vashante Manasa. Tad Vyasasam Tirtham Ushante Manasa. Na Yatra Hamsha Niramanti Ushik Kesha. Nayad Vacha Sitram Padam Hare Yasho. Jagad Pitram Pagrita Kachit. Tadi Vyasam Titam Ushante Manasa. Nayatri Hamsa Niramante Ushak Kata. Nayad Vacha Sitram Padam Hare Yaso. Jagad Pitravram Prigana Kachit. Tadvyasam Tetam Ushante Manasa. Nayatra Hamsa Niramante Ushak Ashaya. So chant. Sorry? You don't recite the entire verse on one word. Okay. Do you want to have a go at it then? Nayad Vachas Chitram Hare Yaso. Tatpitram Pagamitra Karachit. Tadvaya samtitamu shante manasa. Yantri hamsa nishati ushikasha.
Nayat vachas chitrapadam hare yasho.
Nayat vachas chitram hare yaso.
Jagat avitram raga nita kahachit.
Jagat vivitam prakanita kachit.
Adhyaya samtirtamu shanti manasa.
Samtatam ashanti manasa.
Nayatra hamsa niramantyusik shaya.
Nayat vachas chitrapadam hare yasho.
Nayat vachas chitam hare hare yaso.
Jagat pavitram pragrinita karichit.
Jagat vivitam prakanita kachit.
Tadvaya sampitam santi manasa.
Tadvaya samtitam ashanti manasa.
Nayatra hamsa ninamanti usikshaya.
Nayatra hamsha niramantre ushikasha. Nayat vachas chitam padam hare yaso.
Jagat pavitram pragrinita karichit. Tadvaya sampitam santi manasa. Nayatra hamsa ninamanti usikshaya.
So I'll do the word for word. Na, not, yat, that, vacha, vocabulary, chitrapadam, decorative, hare, of the Lord, yasha, glories, jagat, universe, pavitram, sanctified, pagrinita, described, kachit, hardly, tat, that, ayasasam, crows, tirtham, place of pilgrimage, ushanti, think, manasa, saintly persons, na, not, yatra, where, hamsa, all perfect beings, niramanti, take pleasure, ushikasha, those who reside in the transcendental abode. So the translation, but those words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe, are considered by saintly persons to be like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows. Since the all-perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode, they do not derive any pleasure there. So we'll go through the verse again. I'll just read a little section of it. And those words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe, are considered by saintly persons to be like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows, since the all-perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode, they do not derive any pleasure there. So I'll just read the translation again. Those words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe, are considered by saintly persons to be like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows, since the all-perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode, they do not derive any pleasure there. So purport, by his divine grace, Srila Prabhupada, Ki Jai. Purport. Crows and swans are not birds of the same feather because of their different mental attitudes. The fruitive workers or passionate men are compared to the crows, whereas the all-perfect saintly persons are compared to the swans. The crows take pleasure in a place where garbage is thrown out, just as the passionate fruitive workers take pleasure in wine and woman and places for gross sense pleasure. The swans do not take pleasure in the places where crows are assembled for conferences and meetings. They are instead seen in the atmosphere of natural scenic beauty, where there are transparent reservoirs of water, nicely decorated with stems of lotus flowers in variegated colours of natural beauty. That is the difference between the two classes of birds. Nature has influenced different species of life with different mentalities, and it is not possible to bring them up into the same rank and file. Similarly, there are different kinds of literature for different types of men of different mentality. Mostly the market literatures, which attract men of the crows categories, are literatures containing refused remnants of sensuous topics. They are generally known as mundane talks in relation with the gross body and subtle mind. They are full of subject matter described in decorative language, full of mundane similes, metaphorical arrangements. Yet with all that, they do not glorify the Lord. Such poetry and prose on any subject matter is considered decoration of a dead body. Spiritually advanced men who are compared to the swans do not take pleasure in such dead literatures, which are sources of pleasure for men who are spiritually dead. These literatures, in the modes of passion and ignorance, are distributed under different labels, but they can hardly help the spiritual urge of the human being, and thus the swan-like spiritually advanced men have nothing to do with them. But spiritually advanced men are also called manasar, because they always keep up the standard of transcendental voluntary service to the Lord on the spiritual plane. This completely forbids fruitive activities for gross bodily sense satisfaction or subtle speculation of the material egoistic mind. Social literary men, scientists, mundane poets, theoretical philosophers, and politicians who are completely absorbed in the material advancement of sense pleasure are all dolls of material energy. They take pleasure in a place where rejected subject matters are thrown. According to Swami Sridhara, this is the pleasure of the prostitute hunters. But literatures which describe the glories of the Lord are enjoyed by the Paramahamsas who have grasped the essence of human activities. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagat Pate Gopashe Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Vanchakala Patri Rupacha Kripa Sundara Evacha Panitan Pavanabhyo Krishna No Maha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Parunityananda Sri Advaita Gadara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. So welcome everybody to my class. Some of the greatest minds of my generation have come up against the question of giving class on the Srimad Bhagavatam, and now it's my turn. Like in the relay races, when one runner hands the baton to the next runner, the baton has now been given to me, and I have my chance to, well, at least explain a shloka from the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Is this Krishna's arrangement? It's definitely his temple. And of course, it's really quite an auspicious place to deliver a lecture. Just look at how pleasant the surroundings are. Just see how nicely Krishna is arranging everything. Also, it's the month of Kartik, when the benefit from performing acts of devotion to Krishna is increased 1,000-fold. In devotional service, events that seem like a reversal or against one have to be taken and gained from. So just to illustrate this point, I'll tell a little story here. It's a story about a Brahmin, and as is the custom with Brahmins, each day they go begging from house to house. So when he came to this particular house, the man and woman of the house didn't really like to see a Brahmin. So instead of giving him something that he could use, they gave him the soup from the chimney place. But when the Brahmin saw this, he was really sort of really pleased to see it, and he blessed the couple by saying, "May this be the start of your devotional service." So they asked him, "So why are you so pleased to see this?" He says, "Oh, well, I can clean the brass paraphernalia in the temple with it." So I wonder if using the analogy of a baby learning to walk is appropriate. It certainly feels like something like I'm a baby learning how to walk, sometimes standing up and taking a few steps here and a step there, and at the end of it all, baby learns to walk and I learn how to give class. Actually, the baby learning to walk analogy is quite apt. Walking is originally in the child, and by little practice he can begin to walk. Also, Srila Prabhupada uses this analogy to illustrate how a newcomer to Krishna consciousness will take up sadhana bhakti. Actually, there are two parts of sadhana bhakti. The first part is called Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, which means carrying out devotional service according to the rules and regulations. Mangalarti, Sri Tulsi Puja, Japa meditation, these are all carried out according to the rules and regulations. The second part is called Raganuga sadhana bhakti. When this stage develops, one becomes more attached to Krishna and executes devotional service out of natural love. By following the rules and regulations, spontaneous love has developed. So this is Srila Prabhupada writing on sadhana bhakti. There are certain prescribed methods for employing our senses and mind in such a way that our dormant consciousness for loving Krishna will be invoked, as much as the child, with a little practice, can begin to walk. One who has no basic walking capacity cannot walk by practice. Similarly, Krishna consciousness cannot be aroused simply by practice. Actually, there is no such practice. When we wish to develop our innate capacity for devotional service, there are certain processes which, by our accepting and executing them, will cause that dormant capacity to be invoked. Such practice is called sadhana bhakti. Now, foremost amongst these certain processes is the offenceless chanting of the holy names. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Namava Kevalam, Kelanasti, Evanasti, Evanasti, Evagatir Anyata. In this age of quarrel and hypocrisy, the only means of deliverance is the chanting of the holy names of the Lord. There is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way. Actually, we can be in the category of conditioned or liberated. That's all, either conditioned or liberated. The superior potency or the inferior potency, Maya Shakti or Chit Shakti. So when we come to the holy names, this much we can be certain. If it cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years together, extinguishes the blazing fire of conditioned life, of repeated birth and death, is a prime benediction for humanity at large, because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss. It enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. There are also immense potencies that are attached to the holy name of the Lord. As Lord Chaitanya tells us, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds and millions of transcendental names, such as Krishna and Govinda, in which you have invested all your transcendental energies. The chanting of these sacred syllables fully protects a devotee from the agents of Yamaraj and the daunting prospect of falling into ghastly regions of the universe. There's actually a story which illustrates the potency of the holy name of the Lord. So this is the story of Ajamila. To demonstrate the power of Bhakti, Sukadeva Goswami narrated the history of Ajamil. While growing up, Ajamil was trained as a perfect Brahmin, spotless in character and learned in scriptural wisdom. Once, however, while alone in the forest, he chanced upon a lusty Shudra embracing a prostitute. The amorous scene captured his mind, and Ajamila was drawn to that prostitute, whom he later married, shamelessly abandoning his elderly parents and chaste wife in the process. He lost all sense of religiosity, dharma, and knowledge, jnana, abandoned all good qualities, and engaged himself in various sinful acts for the upkeep of his sensual gratification and pleasure. Of his 10 sons, Ajamila was particularly attached to the youngest, whose name was Narayana. As death approached, the fallen Brahman saw 3 dreadful Yamadutas, messengers of Yamaraj, the god of death, appear before him, eager to escort him away. In a fit of desperation, he spontaneously called out for his son Narayana, which caused 4 messengers of Lord Vishnu, Vishnudutas, to unexpectedly appear. The agents of Yamaraj justified their decision to punish the sinful Ajamila, explaining how the conditioned soul is bound by his own works, just as a silkworm is entrapped in a cocoon made of its own saliva. They saw no reason to release Ajamila, who had committed a series of unspeakable sins. The Vishnudutas rebuked the Yamadutas for their misjudgment of the situation. Quite remarkable, they established that Ajamila's inoffensive and desperate chanting was the most powerful atonement in the universe. Simply by once chanting the holy name of Narayana, this Brahman has become free from the reactions of sinful life. Indeed, he has been freed not only from the sins of this life, but from the sins of many, many thousands of other lives. Bhakti is so powerful that it not only destroys sinful reactions, but simultaneously uproots the desire for material enjoyment within the heart. Ajamil was miraculously released. The Vishnudutas disappeared, and the confused Yamadutas returned to their leader, Yamaraj. Ajamila lamented his wayward past and was astonished at his great fortune. He resolved to resume the spiritual life in all seriousness, and thus journeyed to the holy city of Haridwar, the gateway to God. There he became spiritually absorbed, and at the time of death was taken to the spiritual world by the Vishnudutas. Sukadeva Goswami thus glorified the unimaginable potency of the holy name. So the conditioned soul and his knowledge has 4 defects. The first defect is that he makes mistakes. Secondly, he is illusioned. Thirdly, he has imperfect senses. Fourth, he suffers from a cheating propensity. So with these defects, we cannot give perfect knowledge, nor are we perfect. So therefore, we need to accept the Vedas. This Vedic wisdom comes from the perfect source. This knowledge comes down the parampara, disciplic succession, beginning with the supreme spiritual master, Krishna himself. From Krishna, the knowledge was imparted to Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma gave the knowledge to Narada Muni. From him it was passed to Sri Vyasadeva, and so on. This knowledge isn't tainted by any person's interpretation. Krishna is not a conditioned soul, and his knowledge is not tainted by these 4 defects. There are 3 kinds of evidence: Pratyaksha, Anuman, and Shabda. Pratyaksha means direct evidence. This knowledge relies on our senses, and our senses are imperfect. Anuman means inductive knowledge, hypothesis. It may be like this, or it may be like that. It is a suggestion, and Anuman is not perfect knowledge. Shabda Praman means to take the truth from the highest authority. It is the most perfect and it comes from the Vedas. The word Veda means knowledge. Shavasya chaham hiride shanivisto mata smita jnanam aponam cha Vedas chasava aham eva vejo Vedanta krid Vedanta vid eva kaham. I am seated in everybody's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. If one is serious about understanding the Vedic knowledge, then Krishna gives the required intelligence. Why does he present the Vedic knowledge for understanding? Because a living entity individually needs to understand Krishna. So with that in mind, I'll try to discuss the purport. So the background to this particular sloka is that it is spoken by Narada Muni to Sri Vyasadeva, who has been lamenting that although he has produced great volumes of Vedic literature, still he is dissatisfied and incomplete. Narada Muni, who knows the case of Vyasadeva's dissatisfaction, knows the cause of Vyasadeva's dissatisfaction, which stems from Vyasadeva's not describing the sublime and spotless glories of the personality of Godhead. Philosophy without Krishna is considered worthless. So we come to this sloka. This chapter is like a gem in the crown jewel of the Vedic literature, which is also known as the spotless Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam. Also note that this is a dialogue between spiritual master Narada Muni and disciple Sri Vyasadeva. This chapter is called Narada's Instructions on Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's mainly just on that, except toward the end of the chapter, Narada Muni starts to relate the story of how he came to Krishna consciousness. So I'll try to make a few philosophical points relating to the understanding of the purport. So in the second last paragraph of the purport, the phrase "dolls of material energy," it reminds me of that classic illustration of the three modes of material nature, where the modes are depicted as holding the puppet-like subject of the matter of the modes on strings, which illustrates the point that we're not actually in control of our destiny. It's the three modes and the spiritual energy which controls our destiny. So the line between devotee and non-devotee is very clearly drawn. You're either a crow or a swan. In chapter 16 of the Bhagavad Gita, the divine and demonic qualities, you're either guided by truthfulness, forgiveness, austerity, simplicity, charity, gentleness, and modesty, which makes you have the divine qualities, or you're guided by pride, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness, and ignorance, which means you're guided by the demoniac qualities. Shri Shikarnitai Maya Posashiki. So I guess it's no surprise to anybody to learn that the Kali Yuga is relentlessly advancing. So so recently there was a case in the papers where a young man committed a sort of a really terrible crime of violence towards another young man, and in the trial they said that this young man he became addicted to sort of playing video games online from the age of 5, and from the age of 11 he used to play this video game, but he used to play it virtual reality, using a headset, and they say that influenced his decision to commit the crime. So he must have got the sort of impulse to do it from somewhere. So it's all the violence on TV, that definitely has a harming effect on the consciousness. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that a society that's guided by a place that's likened to be a pilgrimage for crows is not really a healthy society. And so the last point that I want to make is that Srila Prabhupada had to do an awful lot of work to get this volume of the Srimad Bhagavatam published. We have Srila Prabhupada Leela Amrita to look at when we need to dig deeper into Srila Prabhupada. But it's still a fascinating tale. So this is what we're left with after all Srila Prabhupada's labours to get the first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam published. It wasn't an easy task at all. There was a great deal of hard labour in it. So that's the end of my class. So if anybody's got any questions or comments, they can put them to me.
Thank you for your class.
All the verses on which you have spoken are very nice verses, and I find them very the translation and the very powerful message given. One question, Prabhu. Like you mentioned that we condition living entities, we struggle, we have these 4 defects, we carry on with these 4 defects, committing mistakes, being illusions and all. And we should take the shelter of the Vedas, because they give perfect knowledge. So, like if I ask myself, I am a conditioned soul, I commit mistakes and I am illusion, how do I know that I should take the shelter of Vedas? And like we all are conditioned souls, so someone telling me you take shelter of Vedas, I can tell that you are a conditioned soul, you are also having this qualities there. Now how do we understand that actually yes, we should take the shelter of the Vedas?
Yeah, very good question. I guess when we sort of become disgusted with material and see that if we can become disgusted with material existence, we see that the sort of the society is a collection of cheaters and the cheated, really. So another aspect of that is the influence of Maya, really. So how does the conditioned living entity become free of the influence of Maya? Well, that can be very difficult. I don't think anybody's ever free of Maya, but you have to sort of point out to him that there's no real happiness in the material world. It's just a place of suffering. Yeah, I guess you'd have to sort of try to explain a little bit of the philosophy of the Vedas to him, really. That would be one way of doing it, yeah.
Thank you. Next presentation. The purport speaks about because of various kind of subject matters, sanctification, for compassion, tolerance, and etc. is also considered a place of pilgrimage for the crows. So just wondering if you could say something that I think also includes mundane news in the same category.
Yeah, it must do, really, because so does mundane, does the news come in the same, can it bracketed in the same way as mundane literature? Yeah, I really think so, yeah, because to be honest, the news is quite depressing. You know, if you only look at the news if you want to become depressed. You know, there's very little good news about. obviously it can be interesting, but it's just produced by the same people who are sort of well, it's produced by the same arrangement which is responsible for keeping us in illusion, Maya. So. Yeah, unless you can take the chance to get free from Maya in some little way, you're going to be bound to a sort of a chain of fruitive action, which could result in you taking a birth in the sort of lower species of life. So, yeah, I guess. So, for that question, I'd say yeah, because like I said, unless you take the trouble to get free from Maya, you're always going to be in a conditioned state of So.
Just a little comment on this. So the idea that we associate with, that we become, so the sound vibration and association, it can be liberating, purifying, and also it can be polluting. But to some extent, of course, we need to know. There was like one occasion, there was a temple president, a former temple president, in Kurunavalan, and devotees were on a traveling party, and they were traveling back to Scotland on one of the Saturdays or something. Wherever they went, they couldn't get petrol because they went to one petrol station, was closed, went to another one, it was closed, went to another one, it was closed. So then they ran out of petrol or something. They went to the president and they said, we're running out of petrol, all the petrol stations are closed. And he said, you didn't know that it's a strike. There's a strike across the country. It says in newspapers, and they said, they shouldn't look at the newspapers. He said they should look at, at least at the front page, to see what's going on. So it's a certain degree of awareness and definitely need to have.
I'll just suggest that perhaps in a devotee community where devotees don't want to become entangled in that kind of energy of crow-like news, you could say, then we can nominate one person who can actually keep an eye on the news, and then that person can disseminate the news to everyone else. Because news actually is just another way, it's another form of advertisement, it's another way to try and drag you into the material energy. So if we state now that we should all be the front page of the newspaper, then we're taking a risk that a lot of devotees are going to may get dragged into other things. I had another question. When you were analysing the different kinds of knowledge, like Prachaksha, Anumana, and Shraddha, and you said Prachaksha is direct knowledge. And I'm not sure if Prabhupada quite often translates Prachaksha as direct sense perception. If we call it direct, then perhaps we may have the tendency of thinking that it's accurate. There's another place where Srila Prabhupada says that Shabda is the direct process. It may not appear to be direct, but the Guru Parampara is the direct line to Krishna. And, may have the tendency of thinking that it's accurate. There's another place where Srila Prabhupada says that Shabda is the direct process. It may not appear to be direct, but the Guru Parampara is the direct line to Krishna. And, may have the tendency of thinking that it's accurate. There's another place where Srila Prabhupada says that Shabda is the direct process. It may not appear to be direct, but the Guru Parampara is the direct line to Krishna. And Because we relied on our senses for so long, then we think that sense perception is direct, but actually it's not. So I'm not saying I'm just suggesting that when we say something's direct, Pratyakshara doesn't actually mean it means direct sense perception. It's not direct in the sense that we're accessing real knowledge directly.
I was just the news now is quite selective the way it's because they're like on social media algorithms. So if you're against the vaccine, for instance, you get all the juicy stuff about why it's not good. And if you're for the vaccine, then you get that because the main function now of news is not to give people information that's accurate, just to keep them glued to the screen longer so they can sell them more things. So I don't know if it ever was that accurate in the first place. There was some agenda behind what information was revealed, and then later on, I think that there was more. But certainly now the agenda is financial. The main consideration, most of what's going on now on the planet is financial viability. And the other one about the crows, I like that. I don't know whether, I mean, I suppose you need to extremely this guy's a crow and this one's a swan. But there must be crows with lapses of swanness and swans that sometimes slip into very crowy stuff. So the crow spectrum wouldn't have from crow to swan. And imagine you don't go from crow to swan overnight, do you? It's usually a gradation.
Yeah, when I was reading it, I thought the sentence where he says, the swans do not take pleasure in the places where crows are assembled for conferences and meetings. I thought of Glasgow at that when he said that, yeah.
In one sense, everyone's a confused swan. I'm trying to pull them back to the original environment. We had to go to the cities and get back to the original environment. So the original environment is actually a Krishna conscious one, or Krishna in a relationship with him. And the other environment is detrimental to one another.
I think that when you said Jayananda, when you said that the swans do not take pleasure in the places, that's like an important point. They do not take pleasure in those places. So if when we're reading the news, we're getting some pleasure, then we can understand we're being contaminated by the crow mentality. But if when we're reading the news, we think, oh, I wish I didn't have to read this, but I have to read it because it's my service to provide some useful information for the devotees. So it's just have to, I suppose the brahmacharya and ashram in one sense is there to protect the devotees from having to engage in that activity, so that the grihastas who already have to interact with society to some degree, then they can kind of filter out the contaminating news and present the petrol strikes to the brahmacharis.
Yeah, the thing that I think has entered Brahmacharya through the phones, everything is not their fingertips. The Brahmacharya, the phone is like a thing that catches people.
I'm also trying not to get caught out by his phone.
Jai! Jayananda. So, insulating ourselves against the formidable task of distracting ourselves from our phones.
Yeah, you just have to sort of try to see things for what they are, really. you may have a bad habit that you need to get rid of. So, you just have to sort of keep trying one step at a time, really. But you've got to remember this is Kartik, so anything you're doing this month, benefits magnified 100 times or even 1,000. Also offences, they're also increased 100 or 1,000 times. So this is a good month for sort of getting back to basics, really.
So you
In your class, like Srila Narad Muni is instructing Srila Vyasdev, and Vyasdev wrote so many literatures and all. So, like, what is the need for writing literatures which do not directly glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Like in here says, the words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe. So, why not just have Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam? Why did Srila Vyasdev himself wrote these many literatures?
So I think with that you have to sort of look at society as a whole. In society as a whole, they're not Krishna conscious, so they don't know what the Bhagavad Gita is worth or the Srimad Bhagavatam is worth. They prefer to sort of they prefer the mundane literature, really. So where were you trying to go with the question again?
should I repeat the question?
Please, yeah.
So if other Vedic literature, they're not transcendent.
Literature only, then what is the need for writing some literature which is not transcendental?
I guess it's because ordinary people are after sort of fame and glory, aren't they, really? Yeah, I'd say that. Maybe they think that they can be clever by sort of writing something that hasn't been written before. Yeah, the difficulty is that sort of deciding if the world starts with the Bhagavad Gita, really. But it's I think the trouble is that society as a whole isn't Krishna consciousness. They don't know the value of Krishna consciousness, so they're bound to sort of keep on repeating their mistakes. Sort of Srila Prabhupada always pointed out that the animals, they're keen on eating, mating, sleeping, and defending, and until we have knowledge of the spiritual of the Bhakti marg, we're bound to sort of share those traits. We're bound to sort of be obsessed with sleeping, eating, mating, and defending. But when we get knowledge of the spiritual sort of spiritual canon or the spiritual life, we can see that these pleasures are sort of easily available to the animals. So what distinguishes us from the animals is that we can sort of realize God. The animals can't realize God. So yeah, that'd be my answer, really.
And also, if you have a mundane, such a mundane knowledge that's very accurate about how to do kung fu or make a house or make a hair, curing, and it instills faith that when they start talking about planetary systems and what people look like in backgrounds, you'd be inclined to accept it because you've been able to verify its authenticity by immediate experience. That will give you the faith to take everything on board. So, like with a map, looking at a map of Australia, if it's got a section on there that's made on this red accurately, you'd be inclined to accept what's saying about Australia, or you can usually go there and verify that.
So this is considered desired tree So he has to, it's like a bridge preaching. Yesterday he was doing a bridge preaching, catching the people who are not interested in transcendence and catching their interest with something that even though, there is lots of things that are like, mode of goodness and other things, there is information about Krishna in those various literatures, so people start hearing a little bit about Krishna, and then we can slowly progress towards the ultimate God.
Thank you. Srimad Bhagavatam ki.
Jai.
Prabhupada ki. Shri Shikho Nitai Mayapur Sashay ki.
Yeah.